Coming up at number 7 is Grim Fandango. The music for the video game Grim Fandango was composed and produced by Peter McConnell and published by LucasArts in 1998. The soundtrack is a mix of South American folk music, jazz, swing, and big band sounds, for the game story is filled with adventure and intrigue set in a unique combination of film noir and Mexican folklore's Day of the Dead.
It's a hole punch. Mind if I use your hole punch?
Knock yourself out.
One South American record that was quite influential for the soundtrack was a Peruvian-style record by Gustavo Santaolalla, which was released at the time and made heavy use of charangos. And of the many artists that he got inspired, Duke Ellington was a huge influence on McConnell's music, and he kept a headshot of him in his studio at LucasArts. For this project, McConnell listened to Ellington's opus continuously and at the same time reading scores of several Debussy works. Next up, we have Metal Gear Guns of the Patriot. The soundtrack for this game was composed by multiple artists such as Nobuko Toda, Shuichi Koburi, and Yoshitaka Suzuki. The main composer was Harry Gregson Williams, and he composed the energetic tracks and the main theme, while the rest of the composers focused on more melodramatic scenes. Two vocal songs were included on the soundtrack. The opening theme, Love Theme, is sung by Jackie Presti and composed by Nobuko Toda. The ending theme, Here's to You, was written by Ennio Morricone, arranged by Harry Gregson Williams, and sung by Lisbeth Scott. While the bulk of Gregson Williams' contributions lean toward pulsating melodrama and action film variation, tracks like Endless Pain, White Blood, and Midnight Shadow take brief side trips into down-tempo eeriness and erratic ambience. Of course, these more mellow tracks are spiced up with occasional violent outbursts of cascading rhythm and clashing orchestral elements. But for the most part, they are steeped more in dark, mysterious tones than anything else. And at number 5, we have Final Fantasy X, composed by Nobu Uematsu. Makes the first time that he had any assistance in composing the score for a Final Fantasy game. His fellow composers for Final Fantasy X were Masashi Hamazao and Junya Nakano. The most highlighted track in the game, and also the theme song, is to Xanarkand, and was originally written by Uematsu before the development of Final Fantasy X, for the recital of a flutist friend named Seo. Uematsu eventually decided the track was too gloomy and kept it for later use. When development of Final Fantasy X started, he decided to use the track for the game. Uematsu went about composing the music for Final Fantasy X by setting up a synthesizer in his office at night. At one point, he turned out 15 songs in an hour, one of which ended up being the theme song. And coming up at number 4, we have The Last of Us.
It's okay, baby. We're safe. We're safe. Hey, we need help.
Stop!
Please. It's my daughter. I think her leg is broken.
Stop right there!
Okay. We're not sick.
Got a couple of civilians on the outer perimeter. Please advise.
During the initial development of The Last of Us, creative director Neil Druckmann and game director Bruce Straley compiled musical tracks that they found inspirational. When searching for a composer to work on the game's music, they realized that Gustavo Santaolalla composed many of their compiled tracks. The composer agreed to work on the game's soundtrack when contacted by Sony. Santaolalla, known for his minimalistic approach to composing, was excited to work on the soundtrack due to the game's focus on the characters and story. He began composing the music early in the game's development, with a few instructions from the development team on the tone that they intended. Emptiness, melodic, organic instrumentation captures the essence of the game. Foreground guitar with synths in the background just creates this absolutely melodramatic and sad world, which every now and then gets filled with some more action-packed parts. Coming up at number 3 is Mario Odyssey. Mario Odyssey is the first Mario game that has a vocalized song, which is inspired by swing music and was composed by composer Naoto Kubo with vocals by Kate Higgins. The whole tracklist of Mario Odyssey OST is an operation between Naoto Kubo, Shibo Fuji, and veteran Mario composer, the OG Koji Kondo. Super Mario Odyssey has a super varied world from gardens to sandy landscapes, underwater levels, and also a real-world simulation. And there's plenty of different vibes of music to match those levels. And one interesting thing is that usually when there is a sandy landscape or a level, composers tend to use a more Eastern texture and intervals in their music. For example, the augmented second, which is a super typical interval in Middle Eastern music. But in Mario Odyssey, they went for the Western vibe, so the texture sounds like it is quite inspired by Western gunslinger movies.
Here we go, off the rails. Don't you know it's time to raise our sails? It's freedom like you never knew. Don't need bags or a pass. Say the word, I'll be there in a flash. You could see my hat is off.
And at number 2, we have Nier Automata.
You just die already!
The music of Nier was composed by Keiichi Okabe with members of his studio Kakeru Ishihama, Keigo Hohashi, and Takafumi Nishimura. Okabe served as the lead composer and as the director for the project as a whole. Okabe was brought into the project and worked intermittently on the soundtrack for the next 3 years until its release. The music for the game was generally composed entirely separate from the development of the game. Often, elements of the game were modified to match the music, rather than the other way around. Some tracks were used in ways that the composers did not envision. such as Grandma, which was expected to be used in the prologue of the game but was instead chosen as a boss battle theme. The music was designed for different motives to appear in various arrangements throughout the soundtrack, and also to convey a sense of sadness even during the thrilling tracks. The original soundtrack was highly praised. Reviewers noted it as one of the best video game soundtracks of the year, praising the originality of the composition and the beauty of Emi Evan's vocal work. And finally, at number 1, we have Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. The soundtrack for Breath of the Wild is truly epic and is the result of a collaboration between Japanese composers Manaka Kataoka, Yasuaki Iwata, and Hajime Wakai. Its mesmeric music was mostly written and performed on a piano, using ambient sounds rather than the melodic and upbeat music in the previous Zelda games, courtesy of iconic composer Koji Kondo. And Wakai believes this adds authenticity to the various environments in the game. Wakai says, "For a year, I tried different types of music to go along with the battles, and tried to include ways for the sound to interact with the gameplay itself. As an example, let's take the main piano theme. In the other Zelda games, there have been other instruments, such as harps and ocarinas, becoming key items during the game. So the main instruments I initially thought of were portable. It might be a little crazy, but I also thought of a dulcimer. But the idea with changing the usual Zelda score was to express this feeling of a large open world. So I thought, isn't it okay to use a large instrument that isn't necessarily portable? In the end, I decided on a piano, which hasn't been used in the series to date. But even though I thought there were lots of things about the piano that made it ideal, I was still anxious over some points, and I remember composing while worrying whether or not it would work at all. Well, it did work, and it's absolutely amazing.